Welcome to IPC Apex 2020. I'm delighted to be joined by John Mitchel, President and CEO of IPC. Nice to see you again, John.
Good to see you, Trevor.
Okay. So we're in a very special time. The industry has basically weathered a very disruptive year in some ways with the China-US trade war and Brexit and these types of things. And just as we seem to be getting out of all of that, we think it's safe to come out of the water, and we have the coronavirus, which is a huge disruptor, particularly in China at the moment, but it's spreading throughout the rest of the world very, very quickly. What are you hearing is happening on the ground with electronics manufacturing?
Yeah, specifically, I'm not an expert in the migratory patterns of the virus, but but in terms of how it's affecting the electronics industry, obviously China is a critical component to the electronics industry supply chain.
Right.
Globally. It's not just a U.S.-China issue. This is a European-China issue. This is a global China issue. And so the impacts are going to be, they're being felt now, just in terms of productions being slowed or stopped. But the longer things stay closed, and the more the supply chain gets disrupted, the more ripples we're going to feel that will go on. You know, some of the items that you're depending on from China have already been shipped,
right?
And so those obviously they're on their way. They're going to go reach their destinations. But other things that maybe you expected to be produced, you know, that might hit us in 2 to 3 months based on the shipping timing of are going to disrupt there. And then you have the next wave that, you know, where there are design meetings or discussions or production meetings that were planned for, you know, just coming after the Chinese New Year. Until this gets resolved, that's going to just have more and more rippling effects.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But it sort of makes you think about the bigger question here, which is, I mean, 85% of our PCBs are manufactured in China. You know, China dominates a number of industries, solar, and quite a few of these industries. Is that healthy? You know, because if you have a large geopolitical event or medical event in this case, you know, it puts the whole supply chain at risk.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, the tariffs that have been going on, the tariff wars going back and forth, have, I think, created a great deal of awareness over the past year or two to the industries to really examine their supply chains that I think they thought they understood them 2 years ago, and they've discovered they needed to learn a lot more about their supply chain going forward. So in effect, for an event as impactful as the coronavirus, in some ways, the companies have been a little bit prepared for it because of the tariffs.
Right.
So, you know, you knew tariffs were coming in the future, so you had to examine those things.
They'd started to sort of spread that geopolitical risk.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
Still, as you point out, there are many different products and pieces that heavily rely on the Chinese market. And so I think companies will start to even look even more heavily because of this on how do we become more diverse.
Right. Right, and protect about it in the future. Now, you've just come back from spending some time touring facilities in Europe and throughout Asia. What were you looking for?
So, you know, I was asked this question by an individual. They said, so, you know, you're trying to help create jobs in the workforce, and there's this big need in the industry, but their perspective of who was working in electronics factories was that it was people like us, older white males. And I was like, well, that's not right.
Right.
And they said, really? And I said, yeah. So, you know, as you know, I travel and visit many of our members around the globe. And so I made it a point this time to stop in at some of the factories and try to learn what is it that factories globally have in common and what are the differences? And those differences or commonalities, how do they compare based on culture, based on the segment of the industry that they're in, based on the vertical that they might be serving. And so there are differences and similarities throughout. Right. So that was really the goal, is just to try to gain more understanding of that so that we might better be able to serve the market. And you know, one of the things that I think I mentioned at one point that I thought was intriguing, because some of the commonalities are that no matter where you go, trying to find good skilled workers is difficult. It doesn't matter where you go.
True.
It's hard to find that. And this is not a recent phenomenon. This is not the last 5 years. This is the last 35 years. As I was talking with some of these factory leads, et cetera, and I asked, so how have you dealt with that? And I got some interesting answers, which I hope will help the industry. So one of those that I thought was particularly insightful was, you can teach the skills, but you can't teach a love for the industry.
Wow, that's quite profound, isn't it?
Yeah, and so what they did is they would look for people that already were enamored with electronics.
Right.
That loved the idea of making a difference in technology, whether they had the skills or not, and then they would help train them to get them those skills.
Right.
And now you've got somebody that's passionate about the industry, and that person isn't going to disappear.
Right.
They want to be part of it. They want to learn more. They want to be a contributor.
Right.
And so that was one of the key findings out of that for me that I thought the
and
industry could
that's
benefit
a
from.
really interesting point, because technically the industry is changing so much at the moment as well,
Sure.
with smart factory and Industry 4.0 and all this type of thing. And a lot of people, or some people in factories are a little bit reticent to sort of get on board with this, because they think it's going to threaten their jobs. Whereas other people, as you say, they're into the technology, they're into the manufacturing, and they embrace it. But there certainly needs to be some work to try and encourage people to get on board with this new technology.
Well, yeah, it's not like, what's the old, we can't be ostriches sticking our heads in the sand, right? There is change that is coming.
Yeah.
And if we don't, if we're not part of leading that change, we're going to be overcome by it, by those who are willing to do that.
Yep.
And so, yes, these technologies may actually disrupt people's jobs as they exist today. But as we've seen in just about every technological breakthrough, there are jobs that don't exist that existed 50 years ago. But we have many, many more jobs today than we did 50 years ago, too. I believe the same type of thing will happen.
Yep.
We will have, utilizing AI, utilizing Industry 4.0, developing these factories of the future, will result in a change in what the workforce is doing, but I actually think you'll actually end up with more jobs out of this. It's just you're going to have to be nimble and flexible enough to be retrained, to keep your skills fresh, because, and we don't even know what those jobs are going to be today.
Right.
And that's okay. You just need to have the fundamental building blocks to be able to be ready to step up to the next level.
That's true. That's true. I mean, the most advanced factory I saw in the world that started on the smart factory route many years ago is actually making 8 times the amount of product they were making 8 years ago, but they've got the same workforce. They haven't lost one member of workforce, really.
Yeah, I've seen similar studies. There was a factory in Germany, I believe, that had that same issue. They've advanced. They didn't have to lose one employee. Right. They retrained, reskilled, and now they're more valuable than ever.
Right. Okay. Now, manufacturers are predicted to spend $26.2 billion this year upskilling workers. What skills are lacking in the EMS industry that we need to be training people for?
In the EMS industry, inspection. Engineers seems to be one of the areas. So there's a few different
operating
positions.
Inspection or
operating inspection.
Okay.
So right now, as we look at the various surveys, when we survey members, about 2/3 of them state that they're having difficulty finding operators, and just less than that. So 66% on the operators, 64% say they're struggling to find engineers as well.
Right.
So it's a need at all levels
right.
of trying to find new people. And then, of course, as you have specialized technologies, finding that specialization. So asking, it's hard to give a specific answer. I know there are several jobs that are hard to fill, but it also depends on the region you're in.
What about analytics? I mean, it's becoming, you're getting so much data coming into you nowadays as a production manager. And,
sure.
The bottleneck is really trying to make sense of that, so that you can make actionable data out of it. It's becoming a much more data-centric job. Is that not an area that's...
Well, there's 2 ways to do that. One, you can hire, you can try to train, and I've seen several interesting programs at universities and others that will sit there and say, bring your professionals in and we'll give them a 5-day course on analytics and how to use the data, how to leverage that. That's one option. The other option that is probably more future-proofed, if you will, is partnering with a firm that has and can leverage big data through AI.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to be an AI expert to take advantage of AI in your company. You just have to be able to partner with somebody that already knows how to do that with you. So you don't need to, it's kind of like our industry itself. OEMs that come up with a product and maybe design a product don't build every aspect of it. They don't actually go out and mine for the gold or the copper that's going to go on the board, or even create the board, or even assemble it. Similarly, just because you have big data and it becomes more data-centric doesn't mean you have to have a huge investment in AI yourself or into a big data algorithms, et cetera. You can partner with the groups that do that, and as that becomes more and more the norm, I think you'll find it become more cost-effective as well. And companies need to be thinking about that today, because it will become a differentiating factor about how well you can survive in the future.
Yep. I mean, one of the new areas that's coming into the smart factory environment is augmented reality, these systems. Do you think that is going to be a driver to be able to expand the skill set of a lot of existing people in the factory?
I actually think, yes, it will. Yes. Short answer, yes. Long answer is I actually see the opportunity that it will not only expand the skills, but it will raise the quality tremendously. I mean, imagine if you're having augmented reality, one vision, and imagine in these glasses I could actually see a layout of what the board is supposed to look like.
Right.
And as it comes across, instead of trying to visually remember where it's going, it's literally overlaid it, and I can manipulate things right as I'm looking at the board itself.
Yep.
Now that my quality, I'm fast, my throughput goes up, my quality goes up, everything wins, and my skill set went up because now I know how to use these type of tools as well.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's going to be a big game changer in the industry. So, just to round off, John, we've obviously had some stability starting to return to the industry with the end of the China-US trade war.
Is it over?
Well, that was going to be my question. I mean, it's gone quiet for now. We've got the first round, but I mean, do you think it's all going to kick off again after the election in November?
I don't know that it will kick off again. I think there will be tensions for some time. We're hopeful, and we continue to advocate with governments all over the world for free, fair, and rules-based trade that everybody will comply with. We think that's really the route to go, that tariffs, frankly, are using the wrong tool for the job to try to overcome the grievances that exist. But I don't think it's going to end immediately.
No.
So yes, I think we've made a good stride in this first phase. That's great for the U.S.-China tariff war, if you will. But I think this is the end of the first battle as opposed to the war. Yeah. And I don't know that it changes that it just rekindles after the election per se. I think this is first phase. The election may cause some of the tensions to pause, just like this coronavirus issue has caused. People are focused on other things, and you can't do everything all at once. And so in the U.S. government, there does seem to be some bipartisan unification around their frustration with some of the things that are going on with China. And so I don't know that is something that's going to change with the election or get worse with the election. I think it's going to be a consistent piece that's going to be worked.
I think it's going to be a long haul. I think, and most people think it's going to be over the next decade and over several administrations.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah. Okay. John, always fascinating to catch up with you and get your insight. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for coming.